In the far reaches of the galaxy, there existed a peaceful and ancient alien race known as the Lithians. Their planet, Valyria, was once a thriving world, home to towering cities and lush green landscapes. The Lithians were known for their wisdom and beauty, their culture admired by many other species. They had long been respected among the galactic community for their knowledge in science, art, and diplomacy. However, as centuries passed, things began to change. The once powerful Lithians had become vulnerable, their resources depleted by endless wars and exploitation. The galaxy, which once hailed them as allies, turned its back on them. They were no longer seen as important. Their world was no longer a strategic location or a source of valuable resources. One by one, the galactic factions abandoned them, leaving the Lithians to face their fate alone. For years, the Lithians had pleaded for help from the Galactic Council. Their messages were ignored, their cries for mercy unheard. The Council, made up of the most powerful alien species, had grown tired of hearing the same plea. They saw no value in helping a dying race. The Lithians' planet was slowly being destroyed by both natural disasters and relentless invaders who sought to take what little remained of the planet's resources. It seemed as if the Lithians were destined to fade into history, forgotten by all but a few. Among those few was Elisa Grant, a young human diplomat. She had recently been assigned to a remote outpost near the edge of the galaxy, far from the bustling core worlds where the grand decisions of the galaxy were made. Elisa had always been interested in space exploration and the different species that inhabited the universe, and her job as a diplomat gave her a chance to make a difference in ways she never imagined. But she never expected to find herself in the middle of a crisis as urgent as this. One quiet evening, Elisa received a message from an unknown source. It was encrypted, but her curiosity led her to decrypt it. The message was from the Lithians, begging for help. It described the desperate situation on their homeworld, the constant attacks by raiders, and the dying ecosystems. The message was short, but Elisa could feel the weight of it. The Lithians were in danger, and no one else seemed to care. Elisa's heart sank as she read the message. She knew that if the Lithians didn't get help soon, they would be wiped out. But she also knew that the chances of getting any kind of assistance from the Galactic Council were slim. The Council had already abandoned the Lithians once, and they were unlikely to change their stance. Still, Elisa couldn't stand the thought of doing nothing. She made a decision that would change her life, and the fate of an entire race, forever. She immediately began drafting a report to the United Earth government, outlining the Lithians' plight. She knew the risks involved in helping a race that no one else cared about. But Elisa had always believed in standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. She believed that humanity had the power to make a difference, even in the vast and uncaring expanse of space. It took a few days for her report to reach Earth, but when it did, Elisa was both relieved and anxious. The response was swift, too swift, in fact. The United Earth government had heard of the Lithian situation and decided to act. The Council's refusal to help only strengthened Earth's resolve to intervene. A fleet was already being prepared, and a diplomatic mission was authorized to reach out to the Lithians. Elisa felt a rush of excitement and fear. She knew the risks. Earth's involvement in this could make them enemies of the Council. But the idea of saving a race on the brink of extinction filled her with purpose. She was ready for whatever would come next. Little did she know, her journey would be full of challenges, and the Lithians' survival would rest on the shoulders of humans who, up until now, had been ignored by the galaxy. As the preparations were made to send a ship to Valyria, Elisa couldn't help but think about the Lithians. She imagined the towering cities she had read about, now in ruins. She thought about the Lithian people, once proud, now broken. She wondered how they would react to the arrival of humans, who were still a relatively young species in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But Elisa wasn't concerned about how they would react. What mattered now was that someone was willing to help. Someone was willing to step up when the galaxy had turned away. And as Elisa looked out into the stars, she felt a sense of hope. The Lithians might be forgotten by most, but not by humanity. The ship would leave soon. The journey to Valyria was dangerous, but Elisa was ready to face whatever challenges awaited. She wasn't going to let the Lithians fade into history. The galaxy may have turned its back on them, but humanity would not. And this was just the beginning. The days after Elisa's report to Earth passed by in a whirlwind of preparation. She didn't have time to breathe. There was no turning back now. The response from Earth had been faster than she expected, and it was clear that the United Earth government was committed to helping the Lithians. Yet, despite the urgency, Elisa felt an uneasy weight on her shoulders. She had never faced anything like this before. But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore the plea for help. Elisa spent the next few days organizing the mission with a team of experts from various fields: military strategists, engineers, scientists, and diplomats. Their job was clear: get to Valyria, provide assistance to the Lithians, and prevent their destruction. The stakes were high, and if they failed, there would be no second chances. The galaxy had already given up on the Lithians. It was up to Earth to ensure their survival. The ship chosen for the mission was called the Vanguard, a sleek, state-of-the-art vessel designed for deep space travel. It was equipped with the latest human technology, including advanced weaponry, communication systems, and a small fleet of drones for reconnaissance and repair. But the most impressive feature of the Vanguard was its Aegis shield, a cutting-edge defense system capable of repelling even the most powerful attacks. This would be their greatest asset when they arrived at Valyria, a planet under constant threat from raiders and space pirates. As Elisa stood in front of the ship, staring at its gleaming exterior, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This ship represented hope, not just for the Lithians, but for humanity itself. It was a symbol of what humans could achieve when they worked together, a testament to their innovation and courage. Elisa was proud to be part of this mission, but she also knew that every step they took forward could bring them closer to danger. The team spent hours going over plans, preparing for every possible scenario. There was no guarantee that the Lithians would welcome their help, but Elisa's diplomatic training told her that their presence was the key to ensuring the Lithians didn't face total annihilation. It was a delicate situation. One wrong move and the entire mission could fall apart. The Vanguard's engines roared to life as it prepared for takeoff. Elisa stood on the bridge, gazing out at the stars. The vastness of space was both thrilling and terrifying. There were so many unknowns. The Lithians were in a precarious position, and the enemy forces were ruthless. They weren't just facing raiders. They were up against powerful galactic entities who had no intention of seeing the Lithians rise again. As the ship made its way through hyperspace, Elisa had time to think. She wondered what the Lithians were like. Their culture, once filled with great wisdom and advancement, had now become a shadow of its former self. They had lost so much over the years. First their strength, then their allies, and now, it seemed, even their will to fight. The journey was long, but it gave Elisa and her team time to prepare mentally for the challenges ahead. The Lithians might have once been powerful, but now they were fragile, relying on others to help them rebuild. The weight of that responsibility didn't escape Elisa. The humans were stepping in to do what the galaxy had refused to do. After several days of travel, the Vanguard arrived at the edge of the Lithian system. The planet of Valyria loomed in the distance, surrounded by a faint haze of destruction. Elisa could see the signs of damage from where they were. Cities crumbling under the weight of constant bombardments, vast stretches of land scarred by conflict. There were no signs of life in the orbiting stations, just silence. "Prepare to enter orbit," Elisa ordered, her voice steady despite the growing tension inside her. The crew worked efficiently, activating the ship's sensors to scan the planet. They quickly detected Lithian signals, faint but alive. The Lithians were still there, clinging to life. "There's a Lithian communication signal," reported Commander Martin, the ship's chief of operations. "It's weak, but it's definitely coming from the planet's surface." Elisa nodded. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The next step would be crucial, establishing contact with the Lithian leadership and convincing them that the humans were there to help, not to take advantage of their weakness. "Let's make contact," Elisa said, her voice firm. The crew worked quickly, sending a transmission to the Lithian leaders. The message was simple: "We are here to help. We offer aid, protection, and partnership. Please respond." They waited, the silence on the other end almost unbearable. Elisa's mind raced as she thought about what would happen if the Lithians rejected their help, but she didn't let her fear show. They had come too far to turn back now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the screen flickered, and a face appeared. An elder Elithian, his features worn and tired. His eyes, however, carried a glimmer of hope. "Elisa Grant," he said in a voice heavy with emotion, "you have come. I never thought I would see this day." The Lithian elder's face was lined with age, his once bright skin now dull from years of hardship. Yet, despite the years of suffering, there was a warmth in his gaze, a glimmer of gratitude. "We will help," Elisa said, her voice steady and full of resolve. "You are not alone anymore." And with those words, the first step toward a new alliance was taken. The humans had arrived, and the Lithians now had a chance to rebuild, to rise once again. But there was still much to be done. The battle for Valyria was just beginning. The Lithian elder's face was still glowing with the faint hope Elisa had sparked. His weary eyes locked onto hers, filled with both desperation and trust. The humans had arrived, and now, a new chapter of the Lithian story was about to begin. But Elisa knew their work had just started. Their arrival was only the first step. Convincing the Lithians to accept help and to work together would take much more. "We will prepare a team to meet you on the surface," the elder said, his voice steady, showing the strain of years spent fighting alone. "But the situation here is dire. You must know that the planet is under constant threat. The raiders, the pirates, they do not rest." Elisa nodded solemnly. "We understand. That's why we're here." She didn't need to say more. Her words were enough. The Vanguard was well equipped to handle most of the threats they would face. But Elisa knew this mission was more than just firepower. It was about showing the Lithians that humanity had something the galaxy had forgotten: compassion and willingness to act when others had turned their backs. "We'll be ready," Elisa added. "We're not going anywhere until you are safe." The elder seemed to hold his breath for a moment, as though waiting for Elisa to change her mind. But when she didn't, he exhaled deeply and finally gave a nod of agreement. "Then I will send our location." As the screen flickered and the connection ended, Elisa stood in the quiet of the bridge, her thoughts running wild. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. The Lithians' survival was now in their hands, but their fate would depend on more than just saving their cities or fighting off raiders. They needed hope. They needed to believe that humanity would keep its promise. Elisa turned to her team. Commander Martin and Lieutenant Sanchez, two of her most trusted officers, were already preparing the ground operation. "We're going down to meet the Lithian leaders and get a first-hand look at their situation. Ready the transport ship." Sanchez, a no-nonsense officer with a sharp mind, saluted. "Yes, ma'am. We're prepping the security teams and medical supplies. The team will be ready in an hour." Elisa couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a chance for humanity to make a meaningful difference in the galaxy. While many of the galaxy's major powers had turned away from the Lithians, Earth had chosen to step up. Elisa believed that, no matter the challenges ahead, humanity could change things for the better. The team gathered in the shuttle bay, and soon, Elisa and her small crew were aboard a transport ship heading toward the surface of Valyria. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, the planet's bleak landscape came into view. Once, this world had been a jewel: green forests, vast oceans, and sprawling cities. Now much of it was reduced to crumbling ruins and ash. The planet's surface is still beautiful, "Despite everything," said Lieutenant Sanchez, her voice soft with awe. Elisa nodded, her gaze focused on the view outside the window. It used to be a paradise, but now it's a world fighting to survive. We're here to help it rise again. The shuttle touched down in a clearing near a small Elithian settlement, and as the doors opened, Elisa was greeted by the elder from the communications. He was accompanied by several other Elithians, each one showing signs of hardship. Their faces were drawn and tired, but there was something else, a quiet strength in their eyes that reminded Elisa of the resilience she'd heard about in stories from Earth's past. Elisa stepped forward, extending her hand in greeting. "It's an honor to be here. We're here to help, in whatever way we can." The elder nodded, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "Your presence is a gift we did not expect. We were ready to face our fate alone. But now, I see that there is still hope. You have proven that there are those in the galaxy who are not afraid to fight for what is right." "We've only just begun," Elisa said with a smile. "But we won't stop until we make sure you have the chance to rebuild." The Elithians led Elisa and her team through their settlement, where signs of destruction were everywhere. Homes had been burned, crops had been raided, and the land was slowly withering under the constant pressure of the invading forces. Elisa could see the scars of the planet's struggle etched into every building, every street. The sight of it left her heart heavy, but she remained determined. The Elithians had suffered enough. Now, humanity would help them rise again. "This way," the elder said, gesturing toward the center of the settlement where a larger building stood. The building had once been a symbol of their strength, but now it seemed like little more than a shadow of what it had been. As they entered, Elisa couldn't help but notice the lack of resources. There were no supplies, no food or medicine, nothing to rebuild what had been lost. The Elithians had endured for so long, but now they were on the brink of collapse. "This is where we must make a stand," the elder said. "We need food, medical supplies, and protection. Without those, we cannot fight off the raiders. And if we cannot fight, we will be doomed." Elisa felt a deep sense of resolve. "We will make sure you get everything you need. But we'll need to work together, humans and Elithians. We'll need to rebuild not just your cities, but your future." The elder's eyes softened. "I have seen many things in my life, but never did I think I would see this. Humans offering what the galaxy had forgotten to give." Elisa smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be hard, but they would face it together. They would fight to protect a forgotten race, and in doing so, they would show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The days that followed were filled with intense preparation. Elisa and her team worked tirelessly, coordinating with the Elithians to ensure their needs were met. They brought medical supplies, food, and resources that the Elithians had been without for so long. But even more importantly, they brought something the Elithians hadn't had in years: hope. Elisa knew this wasn't going to be easy. The raiders were relentless, and Valeria's once mighty cities had been reduced to ashes. But she believed in one thing above all: humanity's ability to rise above impossible odds when they worked together. And in this case, it wasn't just humanity's efforts. It was the combined strength of two races that would make the difference. The Elithians, despite their tired eyes and weary bodies, were quick to rally. It was as if the moment they saw the humans stand beside them, they found a new will to fight. The men and women of the settlement began to rebuild, brick by brick, while the warriors trained. Elisa watched them from a distance, amazed by their resilience. These were people who had been through hell and back, but they still stood tall, still hoped for a better future. The Elithian elder, who had once been a leader in a time of peace, was now becoming a symbol of their defiance. "We must rebuild our strength," he told Elisa one morning, standing alongside her as they looked out over the settlement. "But we cannot do it alone. We will need more than just supplies. We will need fighters. We will need a plan." Elisa nodded, her mind already at work. The Vanguard wasn't a military ship, but it had its own defenses, and the crew was more than capable. But a battle for Valyria would require more than just firepower. It would require strategy, intelligence, and most importantly, unity. "I have a plan," Elisa said after a moment, her eyes meeting the elders. "It won't be easy, but it's the only way we can win." The elder tilted his head. "You have the floor. Speak." Elisa turned to her team. Commander Martin, Lieutenant Sanchez, and a few other officers were already gathered, listening intently. Elisa knew they trusted her, and that trust was something she wouldn't take for granted. "We're going to build a defensive line. We'll take back the most important areas of this settlement and fortify them. At the same time, we'll send a small group to gather intelligence on the raiders, find out where they're coming from, and what resources they have." Sanchez raised an eyebrow. "Are we talking about a direct assault on their camp?" Elisa nodded. "Exactly. We can't afford to wait for them to strike first. We'll hit them before they hit us. It's the only way to weaken their forces and show them that we won't back down." The elder listened closely, his expression thoughtful. "And what of our people? We cannot ask them to fight without proper training." Elisa smiled. "We don't need an army. We need determined warriors. I believe the Lithians are capable of more than they know. I've seen it in their eyes. They want to fight. They want to protect their home." The elder's face softened, a look of quiet pride replacing the weariness. "Then we will stand with you." With that, Elisa knew their plan was set into motion. Over the next few days, the humans and Elithians worked side by side, training the Elithians in basic combat and preparing defenses for the inevitable fight. They reinforced the outer edges of the settlement with barricades, dug trenches, and set up lookout points. It was a desperate attempt, but it was the only chance they had. The human crew members worked tirelessly, bringing in advanced technology to fortify the settlement. The Vanguard shields were upgraded to provide temporary protection, while drones were sent out to scout the surrounding area, searching for signs of the raiders. But it wasn't just the technology that Elisa relied on. It was the spirit of cooperation between the two races. Watching the Lithians and humans share meals, train together, and help each other in the face of overwhelming odds, Elisa felt a deep sense of pride. She had always known humans had a strong sense of duty, but seeing the Lithians rise from the ashes of their despair was something different. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other. The days passed quickly, and soon the settlement was ready. The Lithians had become stronger, more united, and their resolve was unshakable. The humans had taught them more than just how to fight. They had shown them that they were not alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elisa and the elders stood at the edge of the settlement, overlooking the fortified defenses. "They are coming," the elder said, his voice firm. Elisa nodded. "We're ready." She could feel the tension building. The moment of truth was upon them. The raiders would be here soon, and when they arrived, they would find something different waiting for them. They would find a unified force, humans and Elithians standing side by side, ready to fight for what was rightfully theirs. The elder looked at Elisa, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You have given us a chance to fight back. For that, we owe you everything." Elisa gave him a firm nod. "We fight together, or not at all. This is our fight now." And with that, the final preparations were made. The battle for Valyria was about to begin. The air was tense as the night fell over the settlement. Elisa stood at the edge of the fortified camp, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. The ground was silent, but the air felt thick with anticipation. The Lithians had taken their positions, ready to defend their home. The humans stood with them, their faces set in determination. Tonight, they would take the fight to the raiders. Elisa could hear the faint hum of drones in the distance. They had been out all day, gathering intelligence and scouting the surrounding area. They hadn't found much, but one thing was certain: the raiders were closing in. Their movements were erratic, but they were getting closer. It wouldn't be long before the first of them arrived. She took a deep breath and turned to Commander Martin, who stood beside her. "How are the defenses holding up?" Martin glanced over the settlement, his eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "We've fortified every possible entry point. The barricades are sturdy, and the watchtowers are manned. If they try to come in from the north, we'll see them coming. But we have to be ready for anything." Elisa nodded. She knew the plan was solid, but there was no telling what the raiders would do. They had no idea how many there were or how advanced their weapons were. The one thing they knew for sure was that the raiders were ruthless. They wouldn't hesitate to attack if they thought the settlement was weak. "They'll try to break through at dawn," Elisa said. "We need to be ready." As the night dragged on, the tension continued to build. The Lithian warriors, many of whom had never fought before, practiced their combat skills under the watchful eyes of the human soldiers. They moved with precision, their instincts starting to take over. It was a difficult process, but Elisa could see the improvement. They were ready. In the distance, the first signs of movement appeared. Small figures began to emerge from the trees, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. Elisa's heart raced. This was it. The raiders were here. The sound of distant footsteps grew louder. A low growl echoed through the trees, followed by a series of loud bangs. The raiders were advancing quickly, their heavy boots pounding against the earth. The Lithians and humans stood still, waiting for the first wave to make its move. At the command of the Elder, the first volley of arrows flew from the watchtowers, sending sharp, deadly projectiles into the air. The raiders scattered, but Elisa could see that they were no strangers to combat. They were fast, agile, and appeared to be well organized. "Hold the line," Elisa shouted. The words came out more firmly than she expected, but they had the desired effect. The soldiers quickly took their positions, forming a wall of defense around the settlement. The battle began. The raiders came at them with a fury, charging through the trees with weapons drawn. Elisa could hear the sounds of lasers and energy blasts as they clashed with the Lithian defenders. The settlement's walls shook under the impact of the explosions, but the barricades held strong. Commander Martin's voice cut through the chaos. "Focus fire on the front lines. We need to push them back." The humans fired their weapons with precision, their training evident in every shot. The Lithians fought with determination, their advanced combat skills growing more apparent with each passing minute. They were not the same people who had once cowered in fear. Now, they were warriors. Elisa's eyes scanned the battlefield, looking for any signs of weakness. The raiders were relentless, but they were also disorganized. They charged without strategy, attacking anything in their path. It was clear they underestimated the strength of their enemies. The Lithians, however, had the advantage of surprise. Many of the raiders hadn't expected such fierce resistance, and yet the humans and the Lithians fought with a unity that was unmatched. It was a force the raiders hadn't anticipated. "We've got them on the run," Sanchez yelled, her voice full of excitement. She fired another shot, and a raider fell to the ground. But the victory wasn't clear yet. A large figure appeared at the edge of the battlefield, a massive raider with a glowing red blade. He cut through the Lithian lines with ease, and the warriors hesitated. Elisa saw their fear. Without thinking, she grabbed her blaster and sprinted forward. "Focus. Push back," she shouted as she took aim at the massive raider. Her pulse quickened as she lined up the shot. The raider turned, his eyes meeting hers for a split second before she fired. The shot landed perfectly, and the raider fell to the ground with a loud crash. The battlefield went silent for a brief moment before the sound of cheering erupted from the Lithians. Elisa turned to see the warriors rallying. Their spirits lifted. "We've won this round," she said, her voice breathless but filled with pride. "But this fight is far from over." The Elder approached, his face filled with both relief and determination. "You were right, Elisa. The strength of unity cannot be underestimated." Elisa smiled, but her mind was already on the next challenge. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The battle was far from over. Despite their victory in the first clash, Elisa knew the raiders wouldn't back down. If anything, they would only grow more determined. The Lithians and humans had managed to defend the settlement for now, but there was still so much more to be done. The morning after the first battle, Elisa stood on the edge of the settlement, watching as the Lithians and humans began to regroup. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of workers rebuilding the barricades. Some of the Lithians were tending to their wounded, while others helped reinforce the walls. Everyone had a role to play, and Elisa knew that every person would have to fight if they were going to stand a chance. Elisa joined Commander Martin and the elder at the front of the settlement. The elder, although exhausted, stood tall, his eyes filled with resolve. He had witnessed the destruction of his people's way of life, and now he had found something worth fighting for once again. "We can't afford to wait for another attack," Elisa said as she looked out at the surrounding land. "We need to go on the offensive." The elder nodded. "The raiders have a base nearby. We've seen their movements. If we strike quickly, we can take them by surprise." Martin looked at Elisa, his face serious. "We'll need a small, fast team. We can't risk too many soldiers leaving the settlement." "I agree," Elisa replied. "I'll lead the team. We'll hit them fast and hard. We need to take out their leadership and disrupt their supply lines. If we can do that, the raiders won't be able to fight back effectively." The elder looked at Elisa with a mix of respect and concern. "You are asking a lot of your people, Elisa. Are you sure this is the right course of action?" Elisa's gaze hardened. "We can't wait for them to come to us. We have to show them that we won't run. This fight isn't just about survival. It's about taking our home back." With the plan set, Elisa began preparing her team. She handpicked the best soldiers, a mix of humans and Lithians. Each of them had proven themselves in the previous battle, and Elisa knew she could count on them. They would be the ones to strike at the heart of the raiders' operation. Before they left, the elder called Elisa over. "Be careful," he said, his voice quiet but urgent. "The raiders are not like us. They won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to win." Elisa placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent promise. "We'll be back, and when we return, we'll be ready to finish this." As the team set out, the settlement grew quiet. The sounds of construction faded into the background as the group marched into the wilderness. The path ahead was treacherous, with dense forests and jagged terrain, but Elisa and her team were determined. They knew that this was their only chance to weaken the raiders and change the course of the fight. The journey was exhausting. The team moved swiftly, using the cover of trees and hills to hide their approach. As they got closer to the raiders' base, Elisa could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. The closer they got, the more dangerous it became. The raiders' base was located in a valley surrounded by steep cliffs. From a distance, Elisa could see the campfires and the smoke rising into the air. It was heavily guarded, but Elisa wasn't afraid. She had a plan. "We'll divide into two groups," she instructed. "One will create a distraction on the west side, while the other hits them from the east. We'll move in quickly, take out their leaders, and destroy their supplies. We can't afford to stay long." The team nodded in agreement. They were ready. Elisa's heart raced as they neared the base. She could see the raiders moving around, completely unaware of the incoming attack. The team split into two groups and began to position themselves. Elisa, leading the east group, crouched low behind a large rock, watching the raiders. The tension in the air was palpable. Every moment felt like an eternity. She couldn't afford to hesitate. When the signal was given, Elisa's group surged forward, moving quickly and silently. They stormed the raider camp from the east, catching the enemies off guard. Blasters fired, and the raiders scrambled to defend themselves. Elisa's team was faster, more coordinated, and they had the element of surprise on their side. "Take out their leaders," Elisa shouted as they fought their way through the camp. The raiders were in chaos, unable to organize a proper defense. Elisa and her team pushed forward, cutting through the camp with ease. It wasn't long before they reached the center of the camp, where the raider leader was overseeing the operation. The leader, a tall, muscular figure with a fierce expression, turned as Elisa approached. "You dare to attack us?" he growled. Elisa didn't hesitate. With a quick movement, she fired a shot that sent the leader tumbling to the ground. The remaining raiders quickly realized their leader was down, and panic spread through the camp. "We've done it," one of the Lithian warriors shouted. "They're retreating." The raiders, now disorganized and leaderless, scattered into the wilderness. Elisa's team had won, but the battle was far from over. They still had to return to the settlement and prepare for the next wave. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Elisa allowed herself a brief moment of victory. They had struck a significant blow to the raiders. Now, it was time to return home and prepare for the final push. The fight for Valyria was entering its most crucial phase. The days following the raid were filled with tension. Elisa and her team returned to the settlement, their victory a small but important step. The raiders were scattered, but they hadn't been defeated. Elisa knew they would return, and when they did, they would be even more desperate and dangerous. The settlement was now fortified, the walls stronger and the people more united. But the final battle was approaching, and Elisa had a heavy weight on her shoulders. "We've made progress, but the hardest part is still ahead," Elisa said as she stood beside Commander Martin, overlooking the now bustling settlement. The people were preparing for the worst, but Elisa could see the hope in their eyes. They weren't just waiting to defend, they were waiting to fight back. Martin nodded. "The raiders won't give up easily, but they'll think twice before attacking now that they know what we're capable of." Elisa's mind was focused. The raiders' leadership had been weakened, but their numbers were still large. They would come for the settlement, and Elisa was determined to make sure they wouldn't succeed. She had spent hours studying the raiders' movements, and she knew they were gathering forces. Soon, they would strike with everything they had. The elder, though tired, stood with Elisa and Martin. "We have to be ready. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about showing them that we will never back down." Elisa agreed. "This is our home, and we're not going to let anyone take it from us. We'll fight until the end." As the days passed, Elisa continued to prepare. She worked closely with the Lithian warriors and the human soldiers, ensuring that everyone knew their role in the upcoming battle. She could see the determination in their eyes. The bond between humans and Lithians had grown stronger through their shared struggle, and Elisa knew that together they could accomplish anything. The night before the battle, Elisa sat alone outside the settlement. The stars above twinkled softly, a reminder of how far they had come. She thought about the Lithian people and their history. They had suffered so much, and now, with the humans by their side, they had a chance to fight back. The elder approached her, his footsteps soft in the quiet night. He sat beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. "Tomorrow will be difficult," he said, his voice gentle. "But remember, we are not alone. You have your people, your allies." Elisa smiled at him. "I know, and that's what gives me strength. Together, we are unstoppable." The next morning, the settlement was alive with activity. Soldiers lined the walls, ready for the fight ahead. The raiders' forces were visible in the distance, a dark mass moving toward the settlement. Elisa stood at the front, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. She knew this was the moment that would define everything. The future of the Lithians, the humans, and their home depended on the outcome of this battle. The raiders were relentless. They came at dawn, storming the walls with all their might. The battle began with the roar of blasters and the crash of weapons clashing. Elisa's team was at the front, leading the charge. The humans and Lithians fought side by side, their bond stronger than ever. Elisa's voice rang out over the battlefield. "Hold the line. Don't let them break through." The sound of gunfire echoed in the air, and Elisa's heart raced as she led her soldiers to the front. The raiders were powerful, but Elisa's team was determined. Every step they took, every shot they fired, was a testament to their will to protect their home. As the battle raged on, Elisa fought with everything she had. She moved swiftly through the chaos, taking down raiders and ensuring that her people were safe. The commander and the elder fought alongside her, their presence a beacon of hope for the people of the settlement. After what felt like hours, the tide of the battle began to turn. The raiders' ranks were thinning, and their morale was breaking. Elisa could see the fear in their eyes. They had underestimated the strength of the humans and Ilithians. They had thought they could take this planet easily, but they were wrong. Elisa charged forward, leading her team straight toward the raider commander. He was a tall figure, surrounded by his guards, but Elisa was not afraid. She had fought for this moment, and she wasn't going to back down. With a fierce cry, Elisa and her team took down the raider commander. His forces faltered without their leader, and the remaining raiders began to retreat. Victory was in sight. Elisa stood tall, breathless, but triumphant. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of the battle, but the settlement was safe. The humans and Ilithians had won. They had defended their home, and they had done it together. As the last of the raiders flowed into the wilderness, Elisa's team gathered. The elder walked up to her, his face filled with pride. "You've done it. We've done it." Elisa smiled, her heart swelling with relief. This victory is for everyone. For the Ilithians, for the humans, and for the future we're building together. The settlement was safe for now. But Elisa knew that the fight had changed something within her people. They had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, and now they would rebuild and thrive. Together, they had stood strong, and nothing could break their spirit.